Hi, my name is Elena Vasquez. My husband's 26-year-old girlfriend called me too old and worthless for our dream home, the same house I secretly owned outright through my late grandmother's trust. She said I should move to a retirement community and let younger, more deserving people live in luxury. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I smiled, walked to my home office, and spent the next 4 hours making calls that would turn their fairy tale future into a financial nightmare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. By morning, their $2.8 million dream mansion was in foreclosure proceedings, Marcus had lost his job, and Savannah was crying in a hotel parking lot with her belongings in garbage bags. But the one thing neither of them offered me in their desperate 47 voicemails was the respect I'd been craving for 15 years. Before we dive into how I dismantled their entire world in less than 24 hours, I want to know, what time is it where you are, and have you ever had someone underestimate you because of your age? Drop it in the comments because your story might be the motivation someone else needs to hear today. The afternoon that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in Maplewood Heights. I was in my kitchen, the one with marble countertops that Marcus used to say reminded him of his grandmother's house, back when he still noticed things like that. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows overlooking our garden, the same garden where we'd planned to grow old together, where we'd imagine grandchildren playing someday. I was arranging fresh peonies in a crystal vase, the kind of domestic ritual that had once felt meaningful but now felt hollow. At 42, I still moved through our house like I was apologizing for taking up space, even though every mortgage payment had come from my account for the past 8 years, even though the deed bore my name alone, thanks to my grandmother Esperanza's trust, a detail I'd never shared with Marcus, thinking marriage meant we shared everything. How naive that seems now. The front door opened with Marcus's familiar heavy step, but there was something different about the rhythm. Usually he came home alone, shoulders slumped from another day at his struggling insurance firm. Today, I heard laughter. Light, musical laughter that definitely wasn't his. "Elena," he called out, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that had become his default tone whenever he remembered I existed. "Come meet someone." I set down the vase and smoothed my blouse, a reflex born from months of Marcus's subtle comments about my appearance, my clothes, my inability to keep up with his evolving lifestyle. When I walked into our living room, she was there. Savannah Richmond, 26 years old, blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold, wearing a white sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She was perched on the edge of our cream leather sofa, the one Marcus and I had saved for 3 years to buy, like she owned it. "Savannah, this is my wife Elena," Marcus said, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. Not pride, not affection, just introduction, like I was the housekeeper. Savannah stood and extended her perfectly manicured hand. Her smile was practiced, the kind that magazine cover girls master for photo shoots. "Elena, Marcus has told me so much about you." I shook her hand, noting how soft it was. No calluses from years of working, no signs of the kind of life that builds character through struggle. "It's nice to meet you, Savannah. How do you know Marcus?" "Oh, we work together on the new development project," she said, glancing at Marcus with a look that lasted just a beat too long. "I'm the marketing coordinator for Pinnacle Properties." That explained the expensive dress. Pinnacle Properties was the luxury real estate firm that had been courting Marcus's insurance company for months, trying to secure coverage for their high-end developments. Marcus had mentioned the account several times, always emphasizing how much it could change his career trajectory. What he hadn't mentioned was Savannah. "Would you like some coffee? Tea?" I offered, falling back into the hostess role that had become my default setting. "Oh, that's so sweet," Savannah said, settling back onto the sofa like she belonged there. "But we can't stay long. We're actually house hunting today." The words hit me like cold water. House hunting? Marcus cleared his throat, a sound I'd learned meant he was about to say something that would hurt. Savannah's looking for a place in the area. I offered to help her get familiar with the neighborhood.
This area is gorgeous, Savannah continued, her eyes scanning our living room with the calculating gaze of someone appraising property. These older homes have such character. Very quaint. Though I have to say, Elena, this place feels a bit... She paused, tilting her head with mock thoughtfulness. Mature for such a beautiful neighborhood. Mature. The word landed with surgical precision. I mean, the furniture, the decorating style, it's also settled, like something my grandmother would choose. Her laugh tinkled like breaking glass. No offense, it's just that younger families are really transforming this area, bringing fresh energy, modern aesthetics, contemporary living. I felt heat creep up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. This house has been in my family for generations. Every piece has meaning. Oh, how sweet! Savannah clasped her hands together. That's exactly what I mean, though. Sometimes we hold on to things just because they're familiar, even when it's time to let go and make room for the future. Marcus was studying his shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. You know what, Elena? Savannah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, like she was about to share profound wisdom. You should really consider downsizing. Maybe something in a nice 55-plus community. They have such wonderful amenities now. Shuffleboard, book clubs, early bird dinners. You'd probably be much happier somewhere more age-appropriate. This neighborhood is really becoming a place for younger couples who want to build something new. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The clock that had belonged to my great-grandfather, the man who'd built the foundation of the wealth that had bought this house outright. Marcus finally looked up. Savannah has some interesting perspectives on real estate trends. Interesting perspectives. That's what my husband called his girlfriend's suggestion that I abandon my family home because I was too old to deserve it. I smiled then, the kind of smile I'd learned from watching my grandmother negotiate with men who thought they could intimidate her. The kind of smile that meant I was done being underestimated. You know what, Savannah? You're absolutely right. Sometimes it is time to let go of things that no longer serve us. She beamed, completely missing the edge in my voice. I'm so glad you understand. Change can be scary, but it's necessary for growth. Marcus looked relieved, like a difficult conversation had just resolved itself. Neither of them had any idea what I'd just decided to change. As they left, chattering about open houses and neighborhood tours, I stood in my doorway watching Marcus help Savannah into his car, the car I'd co-signed for, paid the insurance on, made possible through my credit and my connections. I waited until their taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I walked to my home office and sat down at my desk and opened the drawer where I kept the documents that would end their fairy tale before it ever even began. Time to show them exactly how mature I could be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before we dive into how I turned their dream into a nightmare, I need to know something about you. Are you watching this at work, sneaking a break from a job where people underestimate you? Maybe you're at home questioning your own worth after someone made you feel invisible. Or perhaps you're lying in bed at 2 a.m., replaying a moment when someone dismissed you because of your age, your experience, or your quiet strength. Drop a comment right now and tell me, what's your age and what's the most ridiculous thing someone has said to you about being too old or too young for something you absolutely deserved? I'm talking about those moments when someone looked at you and decided your number defined your worth. Because here's what I've learned. The people who judge you by your age are usually the ones who've never had to earn anything through time, patience, and actual wisdom. They mistake youth for value and experience for obsolescence. They think wrinkles mean weakness, when really they mean you've survived things that would break them. I want to hear your stories because every comment you leave might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Maybe there's a 35-year-old woman out there being told she's too old to switch careers. Maybe there's a 50-year-old man being pushed out of his company by some 25-year-old hotshot who thinks innovation means erasing everyone who came before. And ladies, let's be real for a second here. How many of you have had some young woman waltz into your life and act like your experience, your home, your marriage, your entire existence was just taking up space that rightfully belonged to her? How many times have you been made to feel like you should gracefully step aside and make room for someone who thinks she deserves your life simply because she's younger? You
I see you. I see those comments already coming in. Sarah from Michigan says a 23-year-old intern told her she was too set in her ways to understand social media marketing. Sarah, who built her company's entire digital presence from scratch. Jennifer from Texas shares that her son's girlfriend suggested she'd be happier in a retirement home at 58. Lisa from Oregon was told by her husband's secretary that older wives should know when to step back gracefully. This is for all of you, because what Savannah Richmond didn't know, what Marcus had forgotten in his midlife fog, was that I hadn't just inherited a house. I'd inherited a legacy. My grandmother, Esperanza, didn't just leave me property, she left me the knowledge of how to protect it. She left me the connections that come from 4 generations of smart women who never let anyone push them around. But more than that, she left me the understanding that sometimes you have to let people underestimate you completely before you show them exactly who they're dealing with. So keep those comments coming. Tell me your ages, tell me your stories, tell me about the moment someone made you feel like your time had passed. Because by the end of this story, you're going to see exactly how much power there is in being underestimated. And Savannah, if you're somehow watching this, and something tells me you might be, probably trying to figure out how your perfect plan went so spectacularly wrong, pay attention. You're about to get a masterclass in why you should never, ever mistake a woman's grace for weakness. The rest of you, grab your coffee, grab your wine, grab whatever you need, because we're about to dive into how a mature woman with outdated decorating taste systematically dismantled a gold digger's dreams in less time than it takes to watch a movie. Trust me, this is going to be worth your time no matter what your age. The home office where I would orchestrate their downfall sat at the back of the house, overlooking the rose garden my grandmother had planted in 1967. Thick Persian rugs muffled my footsteps as I crossed the hardwood floors Marcus used to compliment before he started seeing them as dated. Built-in mahogany shelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound legal books, financial journals, and family documents that told the story of 4 generations of Vasquez women who'd never backed down from a fight. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting gentle shadows across my antique writing desk, the same desk where my grandmother had managed her real estate empire, where my mother had balanced the family's investment portfolio, and where I'd been quietly building my own financial kingdom while playing the dutiful wife. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus had always called this room Elena's little hobby space, never understanding that his wife's little hobby was property law and estate management. I settled into the burgundy leather chair that had molded to my body over 15 years of late-night work sessions. The familiar scent of old books and lavender sachets wrapped around me like armor. This room held secrets Marcus had never bothered to discover, documents he'd never thought to examine, and connections he'd never imagined existed. On my desk sat 3 monitors, a setup that Marcus had chuckled and shaken his head at. What does a housewife need with all that technology? He'd asked last Christmas, not realizing that his housewife managed a portfolio worth more than his annual salary times 10. The left monitor displayed my property management software, tracking 17 investment properties across 3 states. The center screen showed my banking dashboard, where 8 different accounts held the fruits of careful investing and strategic property development.
The right monitor was reserved for what I called relationship research, social media monitoring, background checks, and the kind of detailed investigation that had kept our family's wealth protected for decades. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the small brass lock that Marcus had never seen me open. Inside lay manila folders organized with military precision, property deeds, trust documents, insurance policies, and what my grandmother had always called emergency ammunition. Every important relationship in my life had a file. Every business connection, every family alliance, every potential threat was documented and cross-referenced. Marcus's file was surprisingly thin for a man I'd been married to for 15 years. One folder containing our prenuptial agreement, the one he signed without reading carefully, the one that clearly stated any property acquired through inheritance remained separate property. Below that, copies of every loan application he'd submitted using my name as a reference, every credit check I'd co-signed, every business venture I'd quietly funded through my trust accounts. But it was Savannah's file that would prove most interesting, though she didn't know she had one yet.
I pulled up her LinkedIn profile first. Marketing coordinator at Pinnacle Properties for exactly 8 months. Before that, she'd worked at 3 different real estate firms in 2 years, each position lasting less than 6 months. Her education section listed a community college business certificate and a bachelor's degree from a state school I'd never heard of. Her recommendation section was sparse. 2 generic comments from supervisors who'd clearly written them to avoid employment law issues. Her Instagram told a different story. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, weekend trips to wine country that far exceeded what a marketing coordinator could afford on her salary. Either she came from money, had sugar daddies, or was very good at financing a lifestyle she couldn't sustain. The timestamps on her photos were particularly revealing. Several work trips that corresponded exactly with Marcus's business travel schedule. I pulled up the Pinnacle Properties employee directory and cross-referenced it with my own business contacts. Pinnacle was owned by Harrison Blackwood, a man whose divorce I'd helped finance 3 years ago when his ex-wife needed a property attorney. Harrison owed me favors, and more importantly, he trusted my judgment on character assessments. The room grew warmer as afternoons stretched toward evening. I loosened my cardigan and rolled up my sleeves, feeling my pulse quicken with the familiar thrill of a complex problem that required elegant solutions. This was the work I'd been trained for since childhood, not the cooking and cleaning and emotional support that had consumed my marriage, but the strategic thinking and careful planning that had built my family's fortune. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late tonight, showing properties with a client. Don't wait up." I smiled, screenshotting the message and adding it to a new folder labeled Evidence Collection. If he was showing properties with Savannah, I could track exactly where they went through the GPS on his phone, the family plan account I managed and monitored. The house felt different now, like it was holding its breath. Every creak of the settling foundation, every whisper of wind through the eaves seemed charged with anticipation. I'd always loved this house most in the evening hours, when the afternoon light softened everything and made the rooms glow like amber. Marcus used to love it too, back when he still noticed beautiful things that didn't come with age requirements. I opened the window to let in the evening air, sweet with the scent of jasmine and the roses my grandmother had trained me to tend. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear children playing in the neighborhood park, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Normal sounds of a normal evening in a normal life, except nothing about this evening would be normal for very much longer. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times, each note reverberating through the house like a countdown. In the kitchen, I could see the peonies I had arranged earlier, still fresh and beautiful in their crystal vase. They would probably be wilted by the time this was over, but that was acceptable collateral damage. I pulled out a yellow legal pad, old school, the way my grandmother had taught me, and began making lists. Phone numbers to call, documents to request, favors to collect, pressure points to apply.
Each name I wrote down represented years of careful relationship building, professional networking, and strategic alliance creation. Marcus had always teased me about my little address book, never understanding that those connections were my true inheritance. The house settled around me as darkness began to fall, and I could feel the weight of 4 generations of strong women watching from the walls. Their photographs lined the hallway. My great-grandmother in her suffragette white, my grandmother in her power suits from the 1960s, my mother in her realtor's blazer from the 1980s. All of them had faced down men who'd underestimated them. All of them had won. By the time I heard Marcus's car pull into the driveway at 11:30 p.m., I had 17 phone calls to make, 5 documents to request, 3 meetings to schedule, and 1 marriage to strategically dismantle. The sound of his key in the lock was my starting gun. The signs had been there for months, but like most wives who'd been slowly conditioned to doubt their own instincts, I'd explained them away with the creativity of a fiction writer. Marcus coming home with cologne I didn't recognize became, he must have walked past the department store perfume counter. The sudden interest in updating his wardrobe became midlife confidence boost. His new gym membership and carefully groomed appearance became taking better care of himself for us. What a fool I had been. But as I sat in my office that night reviewing months of credit card statements and phone records, I could see the pattern clearly. It had started in February when Pinnacle Properties first approached Marcus's insurance firm for coverage for their luxury developments. That's when the late meetings began, the business dinners that ran past midnight, the weekend property assessments that required his full attention. February was also when Marcus started making comments about our house feeling stagnant. Nothing dramatic at first, just little observations about how other couples our age were refreshing their spaces and embracing change. He'd bring home real estate magazines featuring sleek, modern homes with clean lines and minimalist aesthetics. He'd point out articles about downsizing and right-sizing for empty nesters, even though we'd never had children to leave an empty nest. "Look at this place in Oakwood Estates," he'd said one evening in March, sliding a glossy brochure across our dinner table. 3 bedrooms, open concept, smart home technology. Everything's new. No maintenance issues, no old systems to worry about. I glanced at the sterile white walls and geometric furniture arrangement that looked like a hotel lobby. "It has no character, Marcus, no history, no soul." "Maybe that's the point," he'd replied, and something in his tone had made me look up from my pot roast. Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what people need.
Now I understood. He hadn't been talking about the house. He'd been talking about his life. The transformation had been gradual but systematic. In April, he'd started working out religiously, trading his comfortable dad bod for the lean physique of a man trying to recapture his youth. He'd replaced his practical sedan with a leased BMW, a decision he'd presented as improving our professional image, while conveniently forgetting that I was the one with the sterling credit rating that made the lease possible. By May, he was shopping for clothes at stores that catered to men half his age, designer jeans that cost more than our monthly grocery budget, button-down shirts in colors he'd previously dismissed as too flashy, a leather jacket that made him look like he was auditioning for a midlife crisis commercial. "You look ridiculous," I'd told him one evening as he modeled his latest purchases. "I look contemporary," he'd corrected. "Some of us are choosing to evolve instead of getting stuck in the past." Stuck in the past. That phrase had become his favorite weapon, deployed whenever I questioned his new spending habits, his late nights, or his sudden dissatisfaction with everything we'd built together. Our furniture was stuck in the past. Our social circle was stuck in the past. Our traditions, our routines, our entire life together, all of it was apparently frozen in some previous decade while he alone had discovered the secret to moving forward. The cruelest part was how he'd made me complicit in my own diminishment.
Every time I expressed concern about his changes, he'd frame my response as evidence of my inability to grow. Every time I suggested we work on our marriage, he'd accuse me of being clingy and resistant to change. He'd turned my love for our home, our history, our life together into character flaws that needed correcting. But it was the money that revealed the true depth of his deception. Marcus had always been careless with finances, content to let me handle the boring stuff while he focused on his career. What he didn't know was that I'd been protecting him from his own financial irresponsibility for years. The student loans from his MBA program that he'd defaulted on, I'd quietly paid them off using my trust fund to protect our credit rating. The business investment that had failed spectacularly in 2019, I'd covered his losses and let him save face with his partners. Every major purchase, every vacation, every upgrade to our lifestyle had been funded through my careful management of inherited assets that he assumed were joint property. The irony was staggering. He was using my money to finance his escape from me, my connections to build his new career, my credit rating to lease the car he'd used to drive his girlfriend around town. The affair itself wasn't even the most painful part. 15 years of marriage had taught me that Marcus was fundamentally weak when it came to temptation. What hurt was the systematic way he'd prepared for my disposal, the subtle undermining of my confidence, the gradual erasure of my contributions, the careful positioning of me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to cherish. He'd been grooming me for abandonment, conditioning me to believe that I was the problem, that my attachment to our life together was somehow pathological. Every conversation had become a chess move designed to make me question my own worth, my own perceptions, my own right to exist in the space we'd built together. But Marcus had made one critical error in his campaign to gaslight me into irrelevance. He'd underestimated the record-keeping habits of a woman raised by 3 generations of business-savvy women who'd survived the Depression, built real estate empires, and never thrown away a single receipt. I had documentation for everything. Every loan I'd covered, every debt I'd paid, every investment I'd funded, every business connection I'd facilitated, every professional introduction I'd arranged for his career advancement. 15 years of financial partnership laid out in meticulous detail, showing exactly who had been the driving force behind our accumulated wealth and status. More importantly, I had proof of what was legally mine versus what he simply assumed belonged to him. The house, the investment properties, the trust accounts, the business partnerships, all of it carefully structured and protected according to the prenuptial agreement he signed without bothering to read thoroughly. Marcus had spent months painting me as dead weight, an anchor holding him back from his bright new future. Tomorrow, he was about to discover that I wasn't the anchor in this relationship. I was the ship, and I was about to sail away, leaving him drowning in the wake of his own arrogance. The question wasn't whether he deserved what was coming. It was whether I'd been patient enough, thorough enough, and strategic enough to make sure he learned the lesson permanently.
As I closed his file and reached for Savannah's, I realized the answer was yes. The breaking point didn't come when I expected it to. I thought it would be the day I found the hotel receipts in his jacket pocket, or the evening I caught him deleting text messages at dinner. I thought it would be one of those dramatic movie moments where I discovered them together in our bed, or found love letters hidden in his briefcase. Instead, it happened on a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning in our kitchen while I was making French toast and Marcus was reading real estate listings on his tablet. "Elena," he said, not looking up from his screen, "we need to talk about the house." I paused, spatula in hand, batter sizzling in the pan. "What about it?" "I've been thinking." He finally looked at me, and his expression was that practiced neutral mask he wore when delivering news he knew I wouldn't want to hear. "We should consider selling." The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. "Selling?" Marcus, this is my family home. My grandmother? Your grandmother is dead, Elena. His voice was gentle, the tone you'd use with a child clinging to a security blanket. And we can't build our future around ghosts. I turned off the burner and faced him fully. Our future? This house is too big for two people. The maintenance costs alone are killing us, and the property taxes keep going up. We could sell this place, buy something smaller and more efficient, and have money left over for traveling, for experiences. He gestured around our kitchen. The kitchen with hand-painted tiles from Italy, copper pots that had belonged to my mother, and a breakfast nook where 4 generations of my family had shared their morning conversations. This is all just stuff, Elena. Things that tie us down. Things that tie us down, I repeated slowly. Look at this property. He turned his tablet toward me, showing a sleek, modern townhouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and stark white walls. 2 bedrooms, open concept, low maintenance. It's in Willowbrook, that new development near the lake. Clean slate, fresh start. I stared at the image. It looked like every generic luxury rental I'd ever seen. The kind of place where people lived temporarily before moving on to somewhere that actually felt like home. It has no character. It has potential, he countered. And it's practical. Elena, we're not getting any younger. Do we really want to spend our golden years maintaining a house this size? Dealing with old plumbing and electrical systems and all the headaches that come with vintage properties? Our golden years, as if he planned to spend them with me. Have you already looked at it? I asked. Something flickered across his face just for a moment before the mask slipped back into place. I drove by it yesterday after work, just to get a sense of the neighborhood. Alone? Of course alone! Why would you— He caught himself, and I saw the exact moment he realized his mistake. Elena, you're being paranoid. That's when I heard it, the sound of a car door slamming in our driveway, followed by the click of high heels on our front walkway. Marcus's face went pale. Expecting someone? I asked. The doorbell rang before he could answer. I walked to the front door, Marcus trailing behind me like a guilty teenager. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see a familiar silhouette. Blonde hair, slim figure, expensive handbag. I opened the door to find Savannah Richmond standing on my front porch, wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Oh," she said, her perfect smile faltering for just a moment. "Elena, I didn't realize you'd be home." "It's Saturday morning," I said evenly. "I live here." Of course, she laughed. That musical sound that had grated on my nerves during our first meeting. "I was just stopping by to—" "Savannah's helping me with some property assessments," Marcus interrupted, appearing at my shoulder. "Professional consultation on market values." "Market values," I repeated. "Actually," Savannah said, stepping past me into my foyer without invitation, "I brought those comps you requested, Marcus, the ones for similar properties in the area that have sold recently." She opened her folder and spread several real estate listings across our antique console table, the table that had belonged to my great-grandmother, where my family had sorted mail and left keys and conducted the small domestic rituals that make a house a home. Now, obviously, this place would need significant updating before listing, she continued, running her finger along the wood grain like she was checking for dust. The decorating is very dated. All this dark wood and heavy furniture, it makes everything feel so closed in. Buyers today want light, bright, open spaces. She gestured toward our living room with our Persian rugs and oil paintings, our dining room with its crystal chandelier and mahogany table.
This aesthetic is very 1990s, very mature homeowner. Young families want something fresh, something that doesn't feel like they're living in their grandparents' house.
I watched Marcus's face as she spoke. He was nodding along, agreeing with every criticism of the home we'd shared for 15 years, the home where we'd hosted his business dinners and celebrated his promotions and comforted each other through his father's death. The kitchen is charming, Savannah continued, walking through our home like she was conducting a tour, but it's not functional for modern living. All these separate rooms, these walls, buyers want open concept. You'd need to gut most of the first floor to make it sellable. Gut most of the first floor? Tear down the walls that held our memories, our history, our life together? The bathrooms are definitely original, she said, poking her head into our powder room. Very retro. I mean, that pedestal sink is almost vintage enough to be charming again. But the tile work... She made a face like she'd smelled something unpleasant. Savannah, Marcus said quietly, maybe we should... Oh, and the master bedroom! She was already heading up our stairs, her heels clicking against the hardwood steps my grandmother had walked up every night for 40 years. Marcus showed me the photos. That wallpaper has to go. And honestly, Elena, I have to ask, why do you have so many family photos everywhere? It makes the space feel very personal, very lived in. Very lived in my own home. I followed them upstairs, watching this woman evaluate every corner of my private sanctuary. She measured the windows, noted the ceiling height, and made comments about maximizing natural light and creating better flow. You know what this house really needs? She said, finally, turning to face both of us with the confidence of someone delivering profound wisdom. It needs to feel young again, fresh, alive. All this history, all these old things, they're just holding it back from its potential. She looked directly at me then, her blue eyes bright with the kind of certainty that only comes from never having been truly challenged. Elena, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I think you've gotten too attached to the past. Sometimes we have to let go of things that no longer serve us, even if they once brought us comfort. This house deserves owners who can appreciate its possibilities, not just its history. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking downstairs, could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could hear the sound of my marriage finally shattering into pieces. Marcus was studying the floor like it contained the answers to life's greatest mysteries. He didn't defend our home. He didn't defend our memories. He didn't defend me. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, Savannah raises some valid points about market positioning. That's when I understood. This wasn't about selling the house for financial reasons or practical considerations. This was about erasing me, erasing my family's legacy, my grandmother's memory, my right to exist in the space that had shaped me into who I was. They wanted a blank slate because I was the history they needed to erase. I smiled then, the same smile my grandmother had worn when business partners underestimated her, the same smile my mother had used when real estate developers tried to lowball her, the same smile that had been passed down through 4 generations of women who never backed down from a fight. You know what, Savannah? I said softly. You're absolutely right. Sometimes we do need to let go of things that no longer serve us. She beamed, completely missing the edge in my voice. I'm so glad you understand. Change can be scary, but it's necessary for growth. Marcus looked relieved, like a difficult conversation had just resolved itself in his favor. Neither of them realized that I'd just declared war. After they left, the house felt different. Not smaller or less significant. If anything, it felt more mine than it had in months. I stood in the foyer where Savannah had spread her real estate listings, where she had calculated the demolition of my family's legacy like she was planning a weekend renovation project.
The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass window my great-grandmother had installed in 1952, casting rainbow patterns across the hardwood floors that Marcus had called outdated and Savannah had dismissed as too dark. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call my sister or my best friend or anyone else who might have expected me to fall apart. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I truly looked at my home through my own eyes, not through the lens of Marcus's criticism or Savannah's aesthetic judgment. The Persian rug in the living room wasn't dated. It was a masterpiece that took artisans 6 months to create. The mahogany dining table wasn't outdated. It was where my grandmother signed the contracts that built her real estate empire, where my mother had planned the investments that tripled our family's wealth, and where I had quietly managed the portfolio that funded Marcus's comfortable lifestyle. The family photos that Savannah found too personal weren't clutter. They were proof of 4 generations of women who had built something lasting, something meaningful, something worth protecting.
I walked through each room slowly, methodically, like I was conducting an inventory, not of things to change or update or modernize, but of treasures to preserve and protect. In the kitchen, I ran my fingers along the hand-painted tiles my grandmother had imported from a small village in Tuscany. In the study, I straightened the photograph of my great-grandmother at her first property closing, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit who had refused to be intimidated by rooms full of men who thought real estate was no business for ladies. By the time I reached my bedroom, the bedroom Savannah had critiqued for its busy wallpaper and excessive furniture, I felt completely calm. Not the artificial calm of someone suppressing rage, but the genuine tranquility that comes from absolute clarity of purpose. I sat on the edge of my bed, the bed where Marcus and I had once planned our future together, and pulled out my phone. For a moment, I just held it, feeling its weight in my palm. This device contained everything I needed to begin dismantling their carefully constructed fantasy. Contact lists, financial access, documentation, evidence. The tools that would transform me from victim to architect of their destruction. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I opened my laptop and pulled up Savannah's social media accounts again, this time looking not for evidence of her affair with Marcus, but for patterns of behavior. Her Instagram was a carefully curated collection of luxury lifestyle content. Designer handbags, expensive restaurants, weekend getaways to places that should have been beyond her salary range. But it was the timing that told the real story. The photos of 5-star hotel dinners corresponded exactly with Marcus's late client meetings. The weekend spa retreats matched his business conferences. The shopping sprees at high-end boutiques aligned perfectly with the unexplained charges on our joint Reddit card that he dismissed as business expenses. She wasn't just sleeping with my husband, she was living off my money while doing it. I scrolled further back, looking for patterns in her employment history. 3 jobs in 2 years, each one lasting just long enough to establish credibility before something went wrong. At Sterling Realty, she'd been let go for inappropriate relationships with clients. At Premier Properties, her departure coincided with a sexual harassment complaint filed by a married investor. At each company, she had started as a bright, enthusiastic team player and ended as a liability they needed to quietly eliminate. Pinnacle Properties was just her latest hunting ground, and Marcus was just her latest target. The difference was that this time she had chosen a man whose wife had the resources and the knowledge to destroy her completely. I pulled up the employee directory for Pinnacle Properties and cross-referenced it with my business contacts. Harrison Blackwood, the owner, had been dealing with his own marital troubles when his ex-wife had needed a property attorney who specialized in complex asset division. I'd connected them, helped navigate the divorce settlement, and earned Harrison's lasting gratitude for keeping his private affairs out of the tabloids. More importantly, I'd learned during that process that Harrison ran his company with old-school values about professional conduct and client relationships.
He'd built Pinnacle's reputation on trust and discretion, qualities that would be severely compromised if he discovered one of his employees was systematically targeting married clients for personal relationships. I made a note in my phone. Call Harrison Monday morning. Next, I reviewed Marcus's insurance company client list. His firm had been struggling for years, hemorrhaging clients to larger companies with better technology and more competitive rates. The Pinnacle Properties account wasn't just important to Marcus personally, it was crucial to his company's survival. If that account disappeared, if Pinnacle decided to take their business elsewhere due to concerns about professional conduct, Marcus wouldn't just lose a commission, he'd lose his job. I made another note. Research Pinnacle's insurance needs. Alternative providers. Then I did something that surprised even me. I started laughing. Not the bitter, cynical laughter of someone who had been betrayed, but the genuine amusement of someone who had just realized how thoroughly her opponents had underestimated her. Savannah thought she was playing a sophisticated game using her youth and beauty to steal another woman's husband and lifestyle. But she was actually playing checkers against someone who had been trained in chess from childhood. She saw only the surface, the comfortable house, the stable marriage, the older woman who could be easily displaced. She had no idea about the trust funds, the investment properties, the business connections, and the legal protections that made me functionally untouchable. Marcus thought he was trading up, exchanging his outdated wife for a younger model who would bring excitement and possibility into his life. But he was actually about to discover that his comfortable existence had been entirely dependent on the woman he was planning to dispose. Every advantage he enjoyed, every opportunity he'd been given, every safety net he had relied on, all of it had been provided by the wife he dismissed as dead weight.
They thought they were renovating their lives, stripping away everything old and inconvenient to make room for something fresh and new. What they were actually doing was demolishing the very foundation that supported everything they wanted to build. I stood up and walked to my bedroom window, looking out over the garden where my grandmother had taught me to tend roses. In the distance, I could see the lights of downtown Maplewood Heights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. Somewhere out there, Marcus and Savannah were probably celebrating their successful morning of property assessment, congratulating themselves on their clever manipulation of the naive older wife who didn't understand her own obsolescence. Tomorrow was Sunday. I would spend it in church, as I did every week, listening to sermons about forgiveness and redemption, while my opponents assumed I was too weak and too traditional to fight back effectively. I would smile at neighbors who would ask about Marcus, and I would give gracious, loving answers about how busy he was with work. But Monday morning, I would begin the systematic destruction of everything they thought they'd built, everything they thought they deserved, and everything they thought they understood about the woman they'd chosen to underestimate. I pulled my phone back out and scrolled to Harrison Blackwood's contact information. I didn't call him. It was too late in the evening for business conversations. Instead, I typed a brief text message. Harrison, I hope you're well. Could we meet for coffee this week? I have some information about employee conduct at Pinnacle that might interest you. Nothing urgent, but I thought you should know. Best regards, Elena. I hit send and felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just the cold, clean feeling of a decision made and a path chosen. They wanted to gut my house, strip away its character, and rebuild it according to their vision. Instead, I was going to gut their future and rebuild it according to mine. Sunday morning found me in the sanctuary of St. Catherine's Episcopal Church, sitting in the same pew where my family had worshipped for 4 generations. The familiar ritual of morning prayer wrapped around me like armor as I listened to Father Morrison deliver his sermon on the parable of the talents. How fitting that on the day before I would begin leveraging every resource at my disposal, I should hear about the wisdom of not burying one's gifts in the ground. Marcus sat beside me, freshly showered and cologne-scented, playing the role of devoted husband for our fellow parishioners. He held my hand during the prayers, sang the hymns with apparent devotion, and smiled warmly at neighbors who inquired about our weekend plans.
To anyone watching, we looked like the picture of marital contentment. A successful couple in their prime, blessed with prosperity and stability. If only they knew that I was calculating exactly how to strip him of both. After service, we lingered in the fellowship hall, sharing coffee and small talk with people who'd known us for years. Margaret Thornton, the church treasurer, complimented my pearl earrings, an heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother. Robert Hayes, who ran the local Chamber of Commerce, mentioned seeing Marcus at the new development site with a lovely young colleague and hoped they were working on bringing more business to the area. Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he recovered with practiced charm. "Always looking for opportunities to serve our community," he said, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that once would have felt supportive, but now felt possessive, controlling. During the drive home, he was unusually quiet. I filled the silence with pleasant observations about the sermon, comments about the upcoming church fundraiser, and mentions of neighbors' news. Normal wife conversation from a woman who was apparently too naive to understand that her husband had spent yesterday planning her displacement with his mistress. "Elena," he said finally as we pulled into our driveway, "about yesterday, Savannah was just being thorough with her market analysis. I hope you didn't take her comments personally." I turned to look at him, this man I'd supported and protected and enabled for 15 years, and marveled at his capacity for self-deception. Why would I take it personally when someone suggests I'm too attached to my family's legacy and should move to a retirement community? She didn't say retirement community, Marcus. She said 55-plus community with shuffleboard and early bird dinners, because apparently at 42, I've outlived my usefulness in my own home. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You're taking it out of context." "Am I?" I gathered my purse and stepped out of the car. "Then help me understand the context. Why exactly were you and your business associate measuring our bedroom yesterday?"
"We're just exploring options," he said finally, "being proactive about our future financial security." Our future financial security. I almost laughed. Marcus had no idea that our financial security rested entirely on assets he didn't legally own, managed by trusts he didn't understand, built on investments he'd never contributed to. His vision of our future was actually a fantasy funded by my past. Once inside, I changed into comfortable clothes and settled into my office, while Marcus disappeared into the garage to work on some project that would keep him busy and out of my way. Perfect. I had serious work to do. I opened my laptop and pulled up a comprehensive financial analysis I'd been updating monthly for years, a detailed breakdown of every asset, every investment, every source of income that supported our lifestyle. The numbers told a story that would have shocked Marcus if he'd ever bothered to pay attention to anything beyond the monthly deposits that appeared in his checking account. The house. Owned outright through the Elena Vasquez Trust, valued at $1.8 million, with no mortgage or liens. Marcus had never contributed a penny to its purchase or maintenance. The investment properties, 17 units across 3 states, generating $23,000 monthly in rental income, all purchased and managed through trust funds Marcus didn't know existed. The stock portfolio. $2.3 million in carefully diversified holdings built from my grandmother's real estate profits and grown through my own strategic trading over the past decade. The business partnerships. Silent ownership stakes in 4 local companies, including 2 restaurants and a boutique hotel, generating steady dividend income that Marcus assumed came from inheritance money. Total liquid assets under my control, $4.7 million. Marcus's contribution to our financial empire, his insurance company salary of $78,000 annually, minus the business expenses I covered, minus the debt payments I'd quietly handled, minus the lifestyle subsidies I'd provided without his knowledge. Net worth Marcus could claim in a divorce? Approximately $12,000 in his personal checking account and half the value of a leased BMW that was already underwater. I printed out the analysis and filed it in my secured documents folder, then moved on to the next phase of my assessment, understanding exactly what Savannah and Marcus thought they were gaining by pushing me aside.
I pulled up property records for the Willowbrook development Marcus had shown me. The townhouse he'd been so excited about was listed at $485,000, well within the range of what he could afford if he assumed he'd be splitting the sale of our house. The listing agent was Rebecca Martinez from Elite Properties, a woman I'd helped navigate a complex commercial real estate deal 3 years ago. I made a note to call Rebecca and express concerns about potential fraud related to the property. Not accusations, just friendly warnings about buyers who might be misrepresenting their assets or creditworthiness. Next, I researched Pinnacle Properties' current insurance arrangements. Their coverage was provided by Mutual Assurance Company, a firm I'd worked with extensively through my commercial property investments. Their contracts were up for renewal in 6 weeks, and given the claims they'd filed related to construction delays and contractor disputes, they'd be looking for competitive alternatives. I had connections at 4 different insurance firms that could offer better rates and coverage than what Marcus's struggling company could provide. More importantly, I had documentation of professional conduct issues that would make any insurance company nervous about liability exposure. Finally, I turned my attention to Savannah's financial situation. Her LinkedIn profile listed her current position as marketing coordinator at Pinnacle Properties, a role that typically paid between $35,000 and $45,000 annually in our market. Yet her social media showed consistent spending patterns that suggested an income at least 3 times that amount. I pulled her credit report. Perfectly legal since I was considering her for a potential business relationship through one of my investment properties. The results were illuminating. $23,000 in credit card debt across 6 cards, all opened within the past 18 months. A car loan for $31,000 on a vehicle worth maybe $18,000. 2 student loans totaling $47,000 that had been in forbearance for the past year. Savannah Richmond was drowning in debt while maintaining the appearance of prosperity. She wasn't just targeting Marcus for his emotional connection. She needed his financial stability to avoid bankruptcy. The expensive dinners, the luxury shopping trips, the weekend getaways were all funded by credit cards she couldn't actually afford to pay off. She was a financial predator disguised as a romantic opportunist, and Marcus was too blinded by flattery and midlife insecurity to recognize that he was being systematically harvested.
But here's what neither of them understood. The lifestyle Savannah was trying to access through Marcus didn't actually belong to him. The comfortable home, the financial security, the social status, all of it was built on assets that would disappear the moment I decided to stop subsidizing his existence. I closed my laptop and walked to the window overlooking my grandmother's rose garden. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly maintained beds, and I could almost hear her voice offering the advice that had guided 4 generations of women in my family. Mija, never let anyone convince you that your strength is weakness, and never let anyone mistake your patience for powerlessness. Tomorrow, Marcus and Savannah would begin to understand the difference between those 2 things. I pulled out my phone and began typing a series of carefully worded text messages that would set everything in motion. To Harrison Blackwood. Harrison, thank you for agreeing to meet. I think you'll find our conversation quite enlightening. Tuesday at 10 a.m. works perfectly. To Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca, I hope you're well. Could we discuss some concerns about a potential property transaction? I'd hate to see you get caught up in any misrepresentation issues. To my attorney, David Chen. David, I need you to prepare some documents for me. Time-sensitive matter regarding asset protection. Can we meet Monday afternoon? To the investigator I'd used for background checks on potential business partners. Sarah, I need a comprehensive report on an individual, usual parameters, rush job. I'll email details tonight. Each message sent felt like loading ammunition into a weapon I'd been carefully maintaining for years. Tomorrow, the war would begin in earnest, and my opponents still had no idea they were fighting someone who'd been trained for this battle since childhood. Marcus called from the garage asking if I wanted to order pizza for dinner. I called back that pizza sounded perfect, my voice warm and agreeable. After all, why spoil our last peaceful Sunday together?
Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made everything feel possible. I woke before my alarm, showered, and dressed in my navy blue suit, the one Marcus had once said made me look too serious, but that I'd always known projected exactly the right combination of authority and respectability. Today, I needed every advantage. Marcus left for work at his usual time, kissing my cheek and mumbling something about late meetings and not waiting up for dinner. I smiled and wished him a productive day, waving from the kitchen window as he backed out of our driveway for what would be one of the last times as my husband. At exactly 9:30 a.m., I walked into the offices of Chen & Associates, where my attorney, David Chen, was waiting with a fresh pot of coffee and the kind of focused attention that came from handling sensitive matters for wealthy clients. David had been my family's lawyer for over a decade, helping us navigate complex trust structures, property acquisitions, and the occasional business dispute that required discreet resolution. "Elena," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his mahogany desk, "your message suggested some urgency. What can I do for you?" I handed him a manila folder containing copies of all the financial documents I'd compiled the night before. "I need you to review our asset protection strategies. Specifically, I want to ensure that all marital property designations are current and accurate according to the prenuptial agreement Marcus signed." David's eyebrows rose slightly as he flipped through the documentation. "Are we anticipating marital difficulties?" "We're anticipating clarity. Marcus seems to have developed some misconceptions about what belongs to whom. I want those misconceptions corrected before they lead to expensive misunderstandings." David nodded, making notes as he reviewed each document. "The prenuptial agreement is quite clear. All assets acquired through inheritance or trust distributions remain separate property. The house, the investment portfolio, the business partnerships, none of it becomes marital property regardless of duration of marriage, even though his name is on some of the utility accounts and insurance policies. Being listed as an authorized user or emergency contact doesn't create ownership rights. The deeds, trust documents, and investment accounts all clearly designate you as sole owner." He looked up from the papers. "Elena, in the event of divorce, Marcus would be entitled to half of any assets acquired during the marriage through joint effort or commingled funds. Based on these documents, that would amount to approximately $12,000 and half the value of a leased BMW. I finished. "Roughly, yes." David set down his pen. "What else do you need?" "I want a formal asset inventory completed and notarized. I want all account access codes changed to require dual authorization. And I want you to send a letter to Marcus's employer informing them that any insurance policies or benefits listing me as a beneficiary or co-owner should be reviewed for accuracy." David made careful notes. "Anything else?"
Actually, yes. I need you to contact Harrison Blackwood's attorney and suggest they review their employee conduct policies, particularly regarding relationships with clients. Nothing specific, just a friendly heads up about potential liability issues. I left David's office feeling lighter, like I'd just shed a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The first moves were in motion, and by the end of the week, the legal foundation of Marcus's comfortable assumptions would be completely undermined. My next stop was Pinnacle Properties, where I'd scheduled a 10 a.m. meeting with Harrison Blackwood under the pretense of discussing potential investment opportunities. Harrison's corner office overlooked the downtown business district with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased his company's success in transforming vacant lots into luxury developments. "Elena," Harrison stood to greet me, his handshake firm and warm. "So good to see you. How's the commercial property market treating you these days?" "Very well, thanks to connections like yours," I replied, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Actually, that's partly why I wanted to speak with you. I've been considering expanding my portfolio, and Pinnacle's reputation for quality developments has caught my attention." We spent several minutes discussing market trends, zoning regulations, and investment strategies. Harrison was clearly pleased to have a potential investor with my track record and financial capacity.
After establishing the business context, I shifted to more delicate territory. Harrison, I hope you won't mind me mentioning something that came to my attention recently. It's probably nothing, but given your company's reputation for professionalism, I thought you should be aware. His expression grew more serious. Of course. What is it? I've heard through social channels that one of your marketing coordinators has been developing rather personal relationships with potential clients, married clients specifically. I kept my tone carefully neutral, concerned rather than accusatory. Harrison's jaw tightened. Are we talking about a specific employee? Savannah Richmond. I understand she's been working closely with married investors, sometimes in social settings that go beyond typical business interactions. I'm sure it's all perfectly innocent, but in today's climate, with harassment lawsuits and professional liability concerns, you're absolutely right to bring this to my attention. We have very strict policies about employee-client relationships. If there are boundary issues, they need to be addressed immediately. I'm probably being overly cautious, I said, playing the role of concerned community member. But I'd hate to see your company's reputation compromised by an employee who might not understand appropriate professional boundaries. Harrison assured me he would investigate the matter thoroughly and thanked me for my discretion in bringing it to his attention. As I left his office, I could see him already reaching for his phone to call HR. Strike two was in motion. My afternoon meeting with Rebecca Martinez at Elite Properties was equally productive. Rebecca remembered our previous professional relationship warmly and was eager to discuss new opportunities for collaboration. I'm actually calling about a potential red flag, I told her over lunch at her favorite downtown bistro. My husband mentioned that some buyers are looking at properties in Willowbrook while misrepresenting their financial qualifications. Rebecca's attention sharpened immediately. What kind of misrepresentation? Claims about shared assets that might not actually be jointly owned. I'd hate to see you get caught up in a transaction where buyers are overstating their purchasing power or assuming access to funds they don't legally control. I didn't mention Marcus by name, but I provided enough details about the specific townhouse and timing that Rebecca would easily identify the potential problem. As a seasoned real estate professional, she understood the liability issues that came with facilitating transactions based on fraudulent financial representations. I'll definitely flag this in our system, she assured me. The last thing we need is a deal falling apart at closing because buyers can't actually access the funds they claim to have. By 3 p.m., I was back home, having set in motion a series of carefully coordinated strikes that would systematically dismantle every assumption Marcus and Savannah had made about their future together. David Chen was already working on the legal framework that would clarify Marcus's actual financial position. Harrison Blackwood was investigating Savannah's professional conduct. Rebecca Martinez was flagging potential fraud in their dream property transaction. But I wasn't finished. The final strike of the day required the most delicate touch. I called Marcus's office at 4:30 p.m., knowing he'd be in his weekly team meeting. I spoke with his assistant, Jennifer, a sweet woman who had always been friendly during company social events. "Jennifer, it's Elena Vasquez. I hope you're well." "Mrs. Vasquez, so nice to hear from you. How can I help?" "I'm calling about the insurance renewal for our investment properties. I need to make sure Marcus understands which policies need to be updated and which ones might be changing providers."
I explained, in carefully vague terms, that there might be some changes to our insurance arrangements that could affect Marcus's commission structure. Nothing definitive, just enough to plant the seed that his most important account might be experiencing some instability. "Should I have him call you when he gets out of his meeting?" Jennifer asked. "Oh, no need to interrupt his work. Just let him know I'll handle the details directly with the insurance companies. I know how busy he is with new client development." Jennifer assured me she'd pass along the message, and I hung up, knowing that by 5 p.m., Marcus would be wondering why his wife was suddenly taking an active interest in insurance arrangements she'd never cared about before. By evening,
I'd made 12 phone calls, sent 8 carefully worded emails, and initiated a cascade of professional inquiries that would completely destabilize the foundation of Marcus and Savannah's plans. None of it was illegal, unethical, or even particularly aggressive. I'd simply leveraged my legitimate business relationships, my actual legal rights, and my extensive professional network to ensure that reality would catch up with their fantasy much sooner than they'd anticipated. Marcus came home at 7 p.m., looking slightly unsettled. "Jennifer said you called about insurance renewals?" "Just some routine policy updates," I replied, not looking up from my book. "Nothing that affects you directly." He stood in the doorway for a moment, like he wanted to ask more questions, but couldn't figure out how to phrase them without revealing knowledge he wasn't supposed to have. "Everything okay at work?" I asked, with innocent concern. "Fine," he said quickly. "Just a busy day." I smiled and returned to my reading while Marcus disappeared upstairs to shower. Tomorrow, his busy days would become much more complicated, and Savannah's career would begin its rapid descent into professional irrelevance. The first strikes were complete, and my opponents still had no idea the war had begun. By Tuesday evening, the first cracks were already showing. I was arranging fresh flowers in the living room when Marcus burst through the front door with the kind of barely controlled energy that signaled professional disaster. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and he carried the distinct aura of a man whose carefully constructed world had just shifted beneath his feet. "Elena," he called out, his voice tight with stress. "We need to talk." I set down the crystal vase and turned to face him with the serene expression I'd perfected over years of managing crisis situations. "Of course, darling. How was your day?" He stared at me for a moment, like he was trying to read something in my face that would explain the chaos that had apparently consumed his professional life. "My day was complicated. There are some issues at work that I need to understand." "Issues?" I arranged my features into an expression of wifely concern. "What kind of issues?" Marcus loosened his tie completely and sank into his favorite armchair, the one Savannah had dismissed as too masculine during her interior design critique. "The Pinnacle Properties account is under review. Harrison Blackwood called an emergency meeting this afternoon about concerns about professional conduct and client relationships." I made a small sound of sympathy. "That sounds stressful. Do you know what triggered the review?" "Some kind of complaint about inappropriate employee behavior. Harrison wouldn't give details, but he's launching a full investigation into client interactions and professional boundaries." Marcus rubbed his temples. "If they find any policy violations, they're threatening to terminate their contract with our firm." The irony was delicious. Marcus was describing the destruction of his most important business relationship without realizing he was talking about his girlfriend's professional downfall. "I'm sure it's just a precaution," I said soothingly. "Companies have to be so careful about liability these days." "It gets worse," Marcus continued. "Rebecca Martinez from Elite Properties called this afternoon with concerns about the Willowbrook townhouse. Apparently, there are questions about buyer qualification and asset verification. She wants to see proof of liquid assets before moving forward with any offers." I set my hand to my throat in a gesture of surprise. "Proof of assets? But surely your income and credit rating?" "It's not about income, Elena. She's asking for documentation of the funds we'd use for the down payment. Bank statements, investment accounts, proof that we actually have the access to the money we'd need to close." Marcus was pacing now, his agitation growing with each word. "Fraudulent documentation." The phrase hung in the air between us, like an accusal he couldn't quite voice. "Well," I said carefully, "I suppose we'd need to show her our accounts and investment statements. That shouldn't be difficult, should it?" Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My heart quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "Of course." It was a question that revealed more than he probably intended. Marcus had finally realized that he'd been operating on assumptions rather than facts, and those assumptions were now being challenged by reality. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking," I replied, though of course I understood perfectly. "I mean, legally, Elena, if something happened to our marriage, if we had to divide our assets, what exactly would that division look like?" The moment stretched between us, heavy with the weight of 15 years of unexamined financial arrangements. Marcus was asking me to explain the prenuptial agreement he'd signed without reading, to clarify the trust structures he'd never bothered to understand, to reveal the legal reality that would destroy every assumption he'd built his affair around. "Marcus," I said gently, "everything is arranged exactly as it was when we married. The prenuptial agreement we signed protects both of our interests." His face went pale. "The prenuptial agreement. The one your lawyer advised you to sign. The one that keeps inherited property separate from marital assets." I maintained my tone of patient explanation, as if I were simply reminding him of details he should already know. "You said at the time that it made perfect sense, that you wanted to protect both of our family legacies." Marcus sank back into his chair like a man who just received devastating medical news. "And the house is family property that came through my grandmother's trust, just as it's always been. The investment accounts? Also trust managed. Again, nothing has changed since we married." I watched him process the implications, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something approaching panic. Everything he'd assumed belonged to us actually belonged to me. Every financial advantage he'd planned to split with Savannah was legally mine alone. The comfortable lifestyle he'd been planning to maintain in his new relationship was entirely dependent on the wife he'd been plotting to abandon. His phone buzzed with a text message, and I watched his expression shift from panic to something closer to horror as he read it. "What is it?" I asked with gentle concern. "Savannah," he said quietly. "She's been called into a disciplinary meeting with HR tomorrow morning. They're investigating complaints about her professional conduct." I made a soft sound of sympathy. "I hope it's nothing serious." Marcus looked at his phone again, then at me, then back at his phone, like he was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together. "Elena," he stopped himself, but I could see the question forming in his mind. The timing was too perfect, the convergence of professional disasters too convenient to be coincidental. His wife, whom he'd dismissed as passive and out of touch, was suddenly displaying detailed knowledge of asset structures and legal arrangements, while his mistress faced career destruction and his own business relationships crumbled. "Did I... what?" I asked with innocent curiosity. Marcus studied my face for a long moment, searching for signs of deception or hidden knowledge. But I'd had years of practice maintaining composure under pressure, years of managing complex business relationships while appearing to be nothing more than a supportive wife. "Nothing," he said finally. "I'm probably just being paranoid." His phone buzzed again. This time his entire body tensed as he read the message. "What now?" I asked. "Jennifer from the office. She says there were some calls today about our insurance arrangements, questions about policy changes and account access." Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "Elena, why would anyone be calling about our insurance policies?" I shrugged with the casual indifference of someone who had no idea why such calls might be significant. "Maybe it's routine renewal stuff. You know how complicated these business policies can get." But Marcus was no longer listening to my words. He was staring at his phone with the expression of a man who just realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield that had been carefully laid around him while he was distracted by other pursuits. Over the next hour, his phone continued to deliver a steady stream of concerning messages. A text from his business partner asking about irregularities in client documentation, an email from his bank requesting updated asset verification for their joint accounts, A voicemail from his insurance agent asking about changes to policy beneficiaries and authorized users. Each message seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow, and I watched him slowly piece together the pattern of professional and financial scrutiny that had somehow focused on every aspect of his life simultaneously. "This can't be coincidence," he said finally, more to himself than to me. "What can't be coincidence?" I asked, though I was beginning to enjoy watching him connect dots that painted a picture he wasn't ready to see.
Marcus looked at me with something approaching fear. Elena, if someone wanted to destroy my career, my relationship with Savannah, and my financial stability, this is exactly how they do it. Professional complaints, asset verification challenges, questions about policy access and account authority. I tilted my head with the expression of someone considering an interesting but implausible theory. That sounds very elaborate, darling. Who would go to such lengths? He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact instant when the possibility first occurred to him. The thought that his quiet, accommodating wife might be capable of systematic professional warfare. But Marcus had spent so many years dismissing my intelligence, minimizing my capabilities, and underestimating my connections that even now, faced with evidence of coordinated destruction, he couldn't quite believe I was responsible. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but someone is definitely trying to destroy everything I've built." I reached over and took his hand with the gentle concern of a loving wife. "I'm sure it will all work out, Marcus. These things usually do." His phone buzzed one more time. This message made him actually flinch. "What is it?" I asked. Marcus looked at me with eyes that held the first glimmer of real fear. "Savannah. She's been suspended pending investigation, effective immediately." I squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I'm so sorry, darling. That must be very stressful for both of you." The weight of that simple statement, the acknowledgement that I knew about both of you, settled over Marcus like a verdict. His affair was no longer a secret, his career was under attack, his financial assumptions had crumbled, and his girlfriend was facing professional ruin. And his wife was sitting beside him offering comfort with a smile that he was finally beginning to recognize as something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. By Thursday morning, what had started as professional inquiries had exploded into full-scale public exposure. I was sipping my morning coffee and reading the local business journal when I saw the headline that would change everything. "Insurance executive under investigation for asset misrepresentation in property fraud case." The article was small, buried on page 3 of the business section, but in a town like Maplewood Heights, it might as well have been front-page news. The reporter had carefully avoided naming Marcus directly, referring only to a local insurance professional who was being investigated for allegedly misrepresenting joint assets in luxury property transactions. But anyone in our social circle would recognize the details: the insurance company, the property development, the timeline. More damaging than the article itself were the comment section and the social media shares that followed. Within hours, speculation was running wild across Facebook groups, neighborhood forums, and professional networking sites. Screenshots of the article appeared in the Maplewood Heights community group with comments like, "Isn't this the same development where the Martinez woman was asking about fraudulent buyers?" And "This sounds like someone I know from St. Catharines?" Marcus's phone had been ringing constantly since Tuesday, but Thursday brought a new level of crisis management. I watched from my kitchen window as he paced our backyard while taking call after call, his free hand gesturing frantically as he tried to contain the spreading damage to his reputation. When he finally came back inside, his face was ashen. "They're pulling the Pinnacle account. Harrison Blackwood called this morning. He's terminating our contract effective immediately due to concerns about professional conduct and potential liability exposure." I set down my coffee cup with appropriate concern. "Oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry. What does this mean for your company?" "It means we're fucked." Then he immediately apologized for his language. "Sorry. It's just,
Elena, that account was worth 40% of our annual revenue. Without it, we might have to let people go. We might not survive this. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus was confiding in his wife about the professional disaster that had been orchestrated by his wife, seeking comfort from the same woman whose marriage he had been systematically undermining for months. "What about Savannah?" I asked with the gentle concern of someone who genuinely cared about his emotional well-being. "How is she handling the investigation?" Marcus's expression darkened further. "She's not handling it well. The HR investigation turned up irregularities. Apparently, she's been using company resources for personal activities, charging personal expenses to client entertainment accounts, and there are questions about her relationship with multiple married clients." Multiple married clients. So Marcus wasn't even her only target, just her latest one. She found text messages on her company phone, messages that suggest she's been deliberately targeting married men with significant assets. There's talk of criminal fraud charges if any financial transactions were based on false pretenses. I made a soft sound of shock. Criminal charges, Marcus? That's terrible. I hope you haven't been implicated in any of this. The look he gave me was pure fear. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Of course." "Did you know about me and Savannah?"
The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. For a moment, I considered maintaining the pretense of ignorance, but Marcus was beyond the point where gentle deception would serve my purposes. He needed to understand exactly how much trouble he was in, and exactly who had put him there. "Yes," I said simply, "I've known for months." Marcus staggered backward as if I'd physically struck him. "Months? And you didn't say anything?" What was I supposed to say, Marcus? That my husband was having an affair with a woman young enough to be our daughter? That she was using him to access a lifestyle she couldn't afford? That he was planning to abandon his wife for someone who saw him as a walking ATM? Each word landed like a precision strike, and I watched Marcus's face cycle through guilt, shame, and growing recognition of his own stupidity. "If you knew, then why didn't you—" Why didn't I what? File for divorce immediately? Kick you out? Make a scene? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where my grandmother had taught me that patience was often the most powerful weapon a woman could wield. "Marcus, you seem to have forgotten who you married." "What do you mean?" I turned back to face him, and for the first time in months, I let him see the steel beneath my soft exterior. "I mean, I'm a Vasquez woman. We don't react emotionally to betrayal. We plan, we strategize, we protect our interests, and we make sure that anyone who underestimates us learns better." The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications of what I was saying began to sink in. "Elena, are you telling me that you—" "I'm telling you that I spent 3 months watching you plan to discard me like an outdated piece of furniture. I listened to you criticize our home, our life, our marriage, while using my money to finance your affair. I watched you bring your girlfriend into my family's house so she could explain why I was too old and too attached to the past to deserve the life I'd built." Marcus was staring at me like I was a stranger. "You orchestrated all of this." "I protected my interests," I corrected. "Everything that's happening to you and Savannah is a direct result of your own choices and behaviors. I simply made sure that the right people became aware of those choices." His phone buzzed with another call, but this time he ignored it. "The property fraud investigation is based on Savannah's actual attempt to help you purchase a home using assets you don't legally own. That's not my fault, Marcus. That's yours. The professional conduct complaints are based on her actual behavior with multiple married clients. Again, not my doing, just consequences catching up with reality." Marcus sank into his chair like a man who just received a terminal diagnosis. "Jesus Christ, Elena, you destroyed us." "No, Marcus, you destroyed yourselves.
I just made sure the destruction was thorough and public enough that everyone would understand exactly who and what they were dealing with. My phone rang then, and I glanced at the caller ID before answering with a warm, professional tone. "Good morning, Janet." "Yes, I saw the article." "Oh, how awful for everyone involved." "No, Marcus and I are fine, thank you for asking. Of course, I'll be at the charity luncheon tomorrow. I wouldn't miss it." I hung up and found Marcus staring at me with something approaching horror. That was Janet Morrison from the country club. She wanted to make sure we were okay after seeing the Business Journal article. Apparently, everyone's talking about it. The consensus seems to be that whoever was involved in this fraud scheme was incredibly foolish to think they could get away with it. Marcus's phone rang again. This time he answered it, and I listened to his side of a conversation that clearly involved more bad news. When he hung up, he looked defeated. "My business partner wants to meet tomorrow. He's concerned about the company's reputation and our ability to maintain client relationships. He's talking about restructuring, possibly buying out my share of the business." I'm sorry to hear that, and I meant it. I'd never wanted to destroy Marcus's career, just to make sure he understood the true cost of his betrayal. "There's more," Marcus continued. "Savannah's been evicted from her apartment. Apparently, she's been behind on rent for months, using credit cards to cover basic expenses. Her landlord found out about the fraud investigation and decided she was too much of a liability risk." I made appropriate sounds of sympathy while internally marveling at how quickly Savannah's carefully constructed facade had crumbled once people started looking beneath the surface.
"She's been calling me all day," Marcus said quietly, "begging me to help her, asking if she can stay here until she gets back on her feet." The audacity was breathtaking. After months of plotting to displace me from my own home, Savannah was now asking to move into it as a refugee from the consequences of her own actions. "And what did you tell her?" I asked. Marcus looked at me with the expression of a man who finally understood the chess game he'd been playing without realizing it. "I told her that this house doesn't belong to me, that nothing I thought was mine actually belongs to me, that I have no authority to invite anyone to stay here." "That was wise," I said approvingly. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and his expression grew even grimmer. "It's from Harrison Blackwood's attorney. They want to schedule a meeting about potential civil liability for damages related to the professional conduct violations." Civil liability. The legal consequences were now extending beyond professional embarrassment into potential financial ruin. "Marcus," I said gently, "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your future and about what it's going to take to resolve this situation before it gets any worse." He looked up at me with the desperate hope of a drowning man who'd just been thrown a rope. "What do you mean?" I smiled, the same smile my grandmother had worn when business adversaries finally realized they needed to negotiate from a position of weakness rather than strength. "I mean, it's time to discuss terms." Friday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. Marcus had spent the day in emergency meetings with lawyers, accountants, and his increasingly concerned business partner. Each conversation had apparently gone worse than the last, judging by the steady deterioration of his composure throughout the day. By the time he returned home at 7 o'clock, he looked like a man who'd been systematically stripped of everything that had once defined him. I was in the dining room, setting the table for what I suspected would be our last dinner together as a married couple. I'd chosen our finest china, the spode pattern that had belonged to my grandmother, and opened a bottle of wine from the collection Marcus had always claimed to appreciate, but never actually understood. If we were going to have a final confrontation, it would be conducted with the dignity befitting the occasion. "Elena," Marcus said from the doorway, his voice hoarse from a day of difficult conversations, "we need to talk." "Of course," I replied, lighting the candles in the center of the table. "I've made your favorite dinner, pan-seared salmon with the herb crust recipe your mother taught me." He stared at me like I'd suggested we discuss vacation plans while the house burned around us. "Elena, I don't think you understand how serious this situation has become." I turned to face him fully, noting how much he'd aged in just the past week.
The stress had carved new lines around his eyes, and his usual confident posture had collapsed into something approaching defeat. I understand perfectly, Marcus. You're facing professional ruin, potential criminal charges, and civil liability that could destroy any hope of financial recovery. Your girlfriend has been exposed as a serial con artist who was using you to access assets that don't actually belong to you. Your business is collapsing, your reputation is destroyed, and your comfortable lifestyle is about to disappear entirely. The precision of my summary clearly shook him. How did you know about the criminal charges? I had a conversation with Harrison Blackwood's attorney this afternoon. Apparently, they're considering filing charges against anyone who might have been complicit in Savannah's fraudulent activities. Your name came up in connection with the property transaction and the false asset representations. Marcus gripped the back of a dining room chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. They called you? Of course they called me. I'm the actual owner of the assets that were allegedly being misrepresented. They need my testimony to establish whether you had authorization to claim access to my trust funds and investment accounts. The implication hit him like a physical blow. Elena, you have to tell them I didn't know. You have to explain that I thought we shared those assets. I walked to my office and returned with a manila folder that I placed on the dining room table beside his plate. Actually, Marcus, I don't have to explain anything, but I do have some things to show you. He opened the folder with trembling hands, and I watched his face change as he processed the first document, a complete transcript of text messages between him and Savannah dating back 4 months. How did you get these? He whispered. Your phone is on our family plan, Marcus. I've had access to your messages since the day we signed the contract. I just never had a reason to look at them before.
He flipped to the next page, which contains screenshots of Savannah's conversations with other men, married men with significant assets, who she'd targeted for similar relationships. The pattern was unmistakable. Identify wealthy married men, establish romantic relationships, gather information about their financial situations, then manipulate them into believing they could afford luxury lifestyles by accessing their wives' money. There are 12 other men, I said quietly. 12 other marriages she's destroyed using the exact same playbook she used on you. The investigators found her files, detailed dossiers on each target, including asset assessments, vulnerability analyses, and timeline plans for relationship development. Marcus stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. She had files on us? She had files on everyone. You weren't special, Marcus. You were just another mark in a long-term fraud scheme. I turned to the next section of documents. These are her financial records. The investigators were very thorough. The bank statements painted a picture of systematic deception. Credit card charges for expensive dinners during the exact times she was claiming to be on business trips. Hotel receipts for rooms that had been booked using stolen credit card information, shopping sprees funded by cash advances that she'd taken against credit cards belonging to her previous targets. She's been arrested. Wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The FBI estimates she's stolen over $200,000 from various victims over the past 3 years. Marcus set down the papers with shaking hands. Elena, I swear to you, I had no idea. I thought she loved me. I know you did, I said, and there was genuine pity in my voice. That's what made you such a perfect target. Savannah's very good at identifying men who are vulnerable to flattery, men who are feeling insecure about their age or their accomplishments, men who can be convinced that they deserve more excitement in their lives. But you knew, Marcus said, and there was something approaching awe in his voice. You knew all along what she was doing. I suspected from the beginning. The timeline was too convenient, her lifestyle didn't match her income, and her employment history showed a pattern of short-term positions ending in unexplained departures. I poured myself a glass of wine and offered the bottle to Marcus, who declined with a slight shake of his head. What I didn't know was how extensively she'd researched our family's assets and how carefully she'd planned to gain access to them through you. I opened another section of the folder, revealing property assessments, trust fund valuations, and detailed financial analyses that Savannah had somehow obtained. She knew exactly how much my grandmother's trust was worth. She knew about the investment properties, the business partnerships, and the liquid assets. She'd researched our prenuptial agreement and understood that you had no legal claim to any of it. Marcus's face went pale. Then why did she... Because she was planning to convince you to pressure me into modifying the trust structures. The investigators found her notebooks, Marcus. She had a detailed plan for how you would gradually isolate me from my support systems, undermine my confidence in my own financial management, and eventually convince me to grant you access to the trust accounts for tax purposes or estate planning efficiency. The elegant manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Savannah hadn't just been seducing Marcus, she'd been researching how to systematically loot my family's generational wealth. The suggestion that we sell the house wasn't your idea, it was hers. She needed you to establish a legal claim to half the property value before the divorce proceedings began. Once you had filed papers claiming marital interest in the house, she planned to help you negotiate a settlement that would give you access to liquid assets in exchange for your theoretical property claim. Marcus buried his face in his hands. Jesus Christ, she had it all planned out. Every detail, including the timeline for when you would leave me, how the divorce would be structured, and how quickly she could convince you to liquidate assets to fund your new lifestyle together. I showed him the final section of documents. She even had backup plans for what to do if I proved more financially sophisticated than expected. The backup plans were chilling in their thoroughness. If I had challenged the divorce settlement or proven difficult to manipulate, Savannah had researched options for contesting the validity of my grandmother's trust, claiming elder abuse in the estate planning process, or even alleging that I had hidden marital assets that Marcus was entitled to claim. She was going to destroy my family's legacy to get at the money, I said quietly. 4 generations of careful planning and strategic investing reduced to a cash grab by a woman who saw our marriage as nothing more than a business opportunity. Marcus looked up at me with eyes that held the recognition of his own complete blindness. Elena, I am so sorry. I don't know how to...
You don't need to apologize, Marcus, I interrupted. You need to understand that this goes far beyond adultery or marital problems. Savannah committed multiple federal crimes, and you were positioned as her primary accomplice. The property fraud, the asset misrepresentation, the conspiracy to defraud, all of it has your fingerprints on it. But I didn't know. The prosecutors don't care what you knew. They care what you did. You signed documents claiming access to assets you didn't own. You provided false information to real estate agents about your financial capacity. You participated in planning to liquidate assets that you had no legal right to touch. The legal reality was stark and unforgiving. Even if Marcus had been an unwitting accomplice, his actions had supported a criminal enterprise that had targeted multiple victims for systematic financial exploitation. However, I continued, and Marcus looked up with desperate hope. There is a way to resolve the situation that protects both of us from further legal complications. What do you mean? I pulled out one final document, a separation agreement that I'd had my attorney prepare that afternoon. You're going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation into Savannah's activities. You're going to provide testimony about how she manipulated you into believing you had access to assets you didn't own. You're going to help them understand the scope of her fraud scheme and your role as an unwitting victim rather than a knowing accomplice. Marcus scanned the agreement with growing understanding. And in exchange, In exchange, I don't file a civil lawsuit for attempted theft of trust assets. I don't pursue criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy, and I provide character testimony about your lack of knowledge regarding the true ownership of our marital assets. The terms were clear. Marcus would lose everything he'd thought he owned, but he would avoid prison and bankruptcy. He would walk away from our marriage with nothing except his freedom and whatever remained of his professional reputation after the investigation concluded. "Elena," he said quietly, "I know I don't deserve this kind of consideration." "You don't," I agreed. "But I'm not doing this for you, Marcus. I'm doing it because 15 years of marriage should count for something, even if that something is just the courtesy of allowing you to escape the consequences of your own stupidity with some dignity intact." He signed the separation agreement with the careful precision of a man who understood he was accepting the best deal he was ever going to get. As the ink dried on the papers that would end our marriage, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or victory, but a profound sense of completion. Justice had been served, my family's legacy was protected, and the woman who had tried to destroy everything my grandmother had built was now facing federal prison time. Marcus would survive this experience, sadder but hopefully wiser, and I would move forward with the knowledge that I was exactly as strong and as capable as 4 generations of Vasquez women had raised me to be. 6 months later, I stood in the rose garden my grandmother had planted, watching the morning sun cast golden light across the blooms that had survived another winter. The house behind me was exactly as it had always been, filled with history, love, and the accumulated wisdom of 4 generations of women who had never backed down from a fight. Marcus had moved out in January, taking only his personal belongings and the expensive clothes that Savannah had convinced him to buy during their brief romance. The BMW had been returned to the dealership when he couldn't make the payments, and he'd found a small apartment across town that better suited his actual financial circumstances. We had signed the final divorce papers on Valentine's Day, which felt poetically appropriate given the circumstances. He'd kept his word about cooperating with the federal investigation. His testimony had been crucial in establishing Savannah's pattern of systematic fraud and manipulation. The prosecutors had presented him as another victim rather than an accomplice, and while his professional reputation had never fully recovered, he had avoided criminal charges and had eventually found work with a smaller insurance firm that specialized in high-risk commercial policies. Savannah Richmond was currently serving a 3-year federal sentence for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge had been particularly harsh in his sentencing, noting that she had systematically targeted and destroyed families for personal financial gain, and that her sophisticated understanding of estate law and trust structures had made her crimes particularly egregious. She'd be eligible for parole in 18 months, but the restitution orders meant she'd be paying off her victims for years to come.
The other men she'd targeted had been less fortunate than Marcus. 2 had lost their homes when their wives discovered the extent of their financial deception. 1 had filed for bankruptcy when the civil lawsuits exceeded his ability to pay. Another had suffered a heart attack during the stress of the investigation and was still recovering. I'd quietly helped his wife connect with resources for legal support and financial planning, understanding all too well what it felt like to discover that the man you'd trusted had been willing to sacrifice your security for someone else's fantasy. But today wasn't about looking backwards. Today was about celebrating the future I'd built from the ashes of my marriage. The Charity Luncheon Committee was meeting this afternoon to finalize plans for the annual Scholarship Fund event. I'd taken over as chairwoman after the previous organizer moved to Florida, and we'd raised twice as much money as the previous year by focusing on educational opportunities for women returning to college after career interruptions or family obligations. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now helping other women rebuild their lives just as I'd rebuilt my own. My real estate investment portfolio had expanded significantly over the past 6 months. Without Marcus's expensive tastes and tendency toward financial irresponsibility, I'd been able to make more aggressive investments in commercial properties and residential developments. The Pinnacle Properties project had actually proven quite profitable once Harrison Blackwood had brought in more ethical management and cleaned up their operational practices.
I'd purchased 3 units in their latest development as rental properties, and the returns were exceeding my projections. More importantly, I'd finally started the consulting business I'd been considering for years. Vasquez Estate Strategies specialize in helping wealthy families protect their assets through strategic trust planning, prenuptial arrangements, and succession planning. My first client had been Margaret Thornton from church, whose son was marrying a woman with concerning financial habits. My second had been Rebecca Martinez, who needed help structuring her real estate business to protect it from potential liability issues. Word of mouth had brought me steady referrals, and I'd recently hired 2 associates to help manage the growing client load. There was something deeply satisfying about using the knowledge my grandmother had passed down to help other women protect themselves from the kind of manipulation I'd experienced. The irony was that Marcus's betrayal had actually freed me to become the person I'd always been capable of being. For 15 years, I'd diminished myself to make him feel more important, hidden my financial acumen to protect his ego, and pretended my family's success was somehow less significant than his modest career achievements. Now I was free to be exactly as intelligent, strategic, and successful as my grandmother had raised me to be. I joined the board of directors for 2 local nonprofits and been elected treasurer of the Chamber of Commerce. My opinions were sought in community development projects, and I'd been invited to speak at the State University's business school about estate planning strategies for family enterprises. The respect I received in professional settings was a stark contrast to the dismissive treatment I'd endured from Marcus during the final years of our marriage. But perhaps the most satisfying change was in my personal life. I'd started dating again, carefully and selectively, but with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth and what she would and wouldn't accept in a relationship. The man I'd been seeing for the past 2 months, Dr. James Patterson, was a widowed cardiologist who appreciated my intelligence, respected my independence, and understood that any serious relationship with me would be a partnership between equals rather than a rescue mission or a financial opportunity. James had lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago and spent the intervening time rebuilding his life with the same deliberate care I'd used to reconstruct mine. He had his own wealth, his own social standing, and his own reasons for being cautious about new relationships. When we had dinner together, we talked about books, travel, and professional challenges. When we attended social events, he introduced me as his accomplished colleague rather than his companion. When we spent quiet evenings together, he was genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions rather than looking for validation or financial support. The contrast with my marriage to Marcus was so stark, it was almost comical. With James, I never had to pretend to be less intelligent, less successful, or less capable than I actually was. I never had to subsidize his lifestyle or manage his emotional insecurities. I never had to wonder if he was with me for love or for access to my family's resources.
This morning, James had called to finalize our plans for next weekend's trip to Napa Valley. We'd be staying at a boutique hotel I discovered through my business travel, and we'd planned a private tour of vineyards owned by families who'd built their wealth across multiple generations. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated, culturally enriching experience that Marcus had claimed to want, but had never actually appreciated when I'd arranged similar trips during our marriage. As I walked back toward the house, I caught my reflection in the French doors that led to the breakfast nook. At 43, I looked healthier and more vibrant than I had at 35. The stress lines that had accumulated during the final years of my marriage had smoothed out, and I carried myself with the confident posture of a woman who was exactly where she belonged. Inside, I poured myself a cup of coffee from the French press and opened my laptop to review the morning emails. 3 new client inquiries, a request to speak at a women's leadership conference, and an invitation to join the advisory board for a nonprofit that provided financial literacy education to women in transition. My phone buzzed with a text message from my assistant. The reporter from Financial Women's Quarterly wants to schedule the interview about your estate planning practice. Are you available next Tuesday afternoon? I smiled as I typed my response confirming the appointment. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman whose own husband had dismissed her as too old and too attached to the past to deserve the life she'd built.
Today, I was being featured in a national publication as an expert in protecting family wealth and empowering women through strategic financial planning. The transformation was complete, but it wasn't really a transformation at all. It was simply a return to who I'd always been, beneath the years of accommodation and compromise that had defined my marriage. I was Esperanza Vasquez's granddaughter, raised to be strong, smart, and uncompromising in protecting what mattered most. I was a woman who understood that patience wasn't weakness, that strategy was more powerful than emotion, and that the best revenge was living so well that your enemies became irrelevant to your story. As I settled into my home office to begin another day of building the empire my grandmother had started, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've not only survived betrayal, but emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentic than ever before. Marcus and Savannah had tried to convince me I was too old for the life I built. Instead, I'd proven that I was exactly the right age to defend it, protect it, and expand it beyond anything they'd ever imagined possible. And that, I realized, was the best possible ending to their story and the perfect beginning to mine.